We're here talking about a new publication in RBM Online on sustainability in the IVF lab and, of course, the clinic. The development of this paper was a collaboration between two organizations, the Alpha Scientists in Reproductive Medicine and a group known as the IVF Initiative. And I want to start by asking embryologist Mina Alikani how, and she's representing the Alpha Scientists, how this collaboration came about and how such a wide-ranging paper with many recommendations, how it came about to be concluded, how the recommendations were made. And in a way, it's sort of one-off in an area which, of course, is still very imprecise. Mina?
Thank you, Simon. Well, this paper really came about as a result of a collaboration, as you said, between I3 and Alpha Scientists in Reproductive Medicine. Both of our organizations have a mission, really, to inform and educate the reproductive scientists and clinical embryologists community, and through collaborations like this. This was an important achievement because we brought together a number of experts in reproductive science, of course, but also in architecture, law, and sustainability, and each participant contributed a part of this paper and covered some key issues that are at the heart of sustainability in laboratories.
The report takes the form of many recommendations based on good evidence, by which clinics, individuals might make for a greener IVF, for better sustainability in the lab. And I first asked Fran how she had become involved in this project.
I was asked to speak at a conference about a year ago, and I was talking about things to do with sustainability in the lab. And I found that people were interested in the topic, but just didn't know what to do or how to make any changes. So I was kind of describing it how we have the WHO manual for semen preparation, we have the Alpha paper for air quality in the lab. Why don't we have a document that's kind of like the go-to reference for how to be sustainable in the lab? So I got together with some very distinguished people and my co-authors, but we had a small group and we were thinking, what topics should we include? Because this is something that just hasn't really been covered at all yet. And then who can we invite? Because we're not experts in all the areas. So we brought in people that were IVF specialists, but also just experts within sustainability, kind of got everyone together or from all over the world, had a Zoom call, and sort of everyone gave a little presentation on their topic. And then we came together and discussed sort of action points so that we could provide realistic options for people to make changes.
Awareness is the most important element here, because awareness will also lead to, hopefully, a change in culture. Once people know what is at stake and how they may be contributing to this problem through this important work, they can make adjustments to the way they work so that they can reduce the carbon footprint of their laboratories and help move towards solving this problem?
Many of the recommendations which emerge from this paper are quite practical. They're to do with waste management, cryo storage programs, and so on. But in fact, the culture that you're talking about now is not that practical, is it? I mean, how would you hope to achieve that? That all members of a clinic or a lab are actually on the same page, that they recognize the problem, and that they're ready to make changes, to adopt policies which will encourage sustainability.
As you said, the first plan is awareness, and we are dealing very new ground as an industry, if you like. But we took a lot of the examples of what people are doing from different industries, okay, and we've applied it to to what happens in assisted reproduction. We've given some very broad recommendations, but at the crux of that is an establishment of a green team. And of course, if you have a team who are dedicated, who are thinking about sustainability in the clinic, then that, of course, is half the battle done. And we have some very interesting diagrams in the publication, which are done by an embryologist who also is a graphic designer, who put forward step-by-step sort of compartments of what an IVF clinic is made of. And we can at least address those points bit by bit. But I think the crux of this is to have an appointed green ambassador, you could say, or green team that will start the ball rolling, because when bringing this to light, and this started a couple of years ago, really, with a few webinars which touched on what we called Green IVF with the International IVF Initiative, we found a groundswell of people who were doing things separately in their labs to try and reduce waste or recycle the products. But by just homing in on that, looking also at the companies which are involved and the processes, that perhaps we can slowly give some force to third parties who can then look at their own programs to make things such as labeling a little bit more or less wasteful. Lab construction as well was looked at in the paper as well, and of course transport between each clinic, as well as the energy requirements as well. So all these points are covered by all these many experts which we could bring in on this online platform.
You note several areas of concern within IVF labs. Which would you say were the biggest problem areas right now?
Certainly the consumables, disposables is an area of concern. Massive amounts of plastics that we use. Transportation, almost unavoidable right now. Travel, maybe don't hire employees or staff members that live 100 kilometers away. But hire people who are in closer vicinity. Certainly travel, if you look at all these different aspects of a clinical facility, an IVF laboratory is a clinical facility, then transportation has a major impact. But in the IVF lab, we're particularly affected by the high amounts of consumables that are being processed. And all that is needed, and I think that word was mentioned quite correctly already a few times, is awareness. It's like, how can we diminish that by 10%? How can we diminish it by 30%? You don't, in all these things, you don't have to really, in all these aspects of sustainability, you do not have to really go from one extreme to another extreme. You do that stage-wise, calm, so that nobody gets upset, and certainly patient care is affected. Patient care is the most important issue. Don't affect that. That's number one. Just see if you can reduce the number of dishes per patient. Let's say that number is 10. Can you reduce it to 9? And you'll find that that is very easy to do. Then, once you have accomplished that, it may take a few months. Then, how can you take that further down till you reach a number that's acceptable clinically, gives you the same result, The same safety aspects are kept in mind. Safety is also a concern. Then I think you're starting to achieve something. I just give petri dishes, don't want to give petri dishes a bad rap, definitely not. But we are consuming them often uninhibitedly. I mean, there's very little conversation going on. Well, if we change our culture system, well, we're increasing the number of petri dishes by 30%, or the amount of plastic by 30%. Some petri dishes are more green than others. And so I think that's really the operation, and that's in all aspects of life the same. You can achieve sustainability relatively easy by doing it stepwise and thinking about each step and how much does it affect your life. In this case, how much does it affect the safety of the patient and the outcomes for the patient.
The paper makes a point about waste management, which also seems a problem area for clinics. Is this fair to say? Does waste affect both the clinic and the lab?
There's definitely a waste problem. And I think that's the invention of plastic and single use to eliminate infection. It's been great, but also has come with a very strong negative with all the waste that we're generating. And it's very hard to avoid it, but that's why we need that communication with our suppliers to help us be more sustainable. And that's kind of what we've included in the paper, is that it's not just the clinics that need to make changes, but everyone within the field, our suppliers, also our policymakers.
Freezing such a huge part of a modern IVF program now. I mean, how can you reduce the amount of freezing that's going on?
Yeah, it's freezing as well as gas consumptions, right? And don't forget that our incubators running on specialty gases.
Sure.
Are components of air, but we calculate it, which makes it difficult. You cannot culture in air. Well, you can, but it gives you very, very poor results in the systems that have been developed. So it's both for gases as well as liquid nitrogen. I'm glad you're raising that point. Well, miniaturization is one of them, and automation is another aspect. I think in everything we do, I think automation will be a platform that allows us to reduce consumption, because space is so important. And as you very well know, the number of embryos that were frozen 30 years ago was maybe 1 or 2% of all the embryos that were developing. That number has now gone up in many labs to 100% or close to 100%.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and so this is now a massive problem. We are all biorepositories. All these IVF clinics are biorepositories, and one way to solve liquid nitrogen, as you mentioned, how can we reduce that amount, is to start thinking about the process that when you're shopping for a doer or an automated system, that you calculate how much does each little space take. And you'll find that the larger containers are probably a little bit more economic and also probably better in doing that, which brings us to the point, well, don't keep all the embryos, all the oocytes, all the sperm frozen in your facility. Move them over if they're not being used, or unclaimed or claimed. If they're not being used after a few years, move them over to central facilities. That, of course, brings us to another problem, which is transportation again. But these calculations can be made. We haven't really calculated as an industry how much each aspect cost. So your question is right on. The liquid nitrogen thing, let's take that out and now study this. I think what this paper is doing is pointing out the highlights of the big issue. It's pointing out the highlights. These now each have to be taken apart and see how we can improve this. Liquid nitrogen is a good point. Maybe we should produce our own liquid nitrogen. In liquid nitrogen, a big problem is you're using trucks to transport it around, often in inner cities, which means traffic lights, and you're just increasing the carbon footprint right there. So maybe we should produce our own liquid nitrogen. And that is done by some clinics. It's rare. It's done by some clinics, but let's take a look at that. What does that take? Can that be done? Is that more sustainable? And maybe that's what we should be doing more and more. And again, this is not a call to now within a year, every clinic should go to liquid nitrogen production and generation. But let's take a look at that and calculate if that gives us an advantage. But it certainly is miniaturization, so making the space that a frozen embryo takes smaller and smaller, and it is liquid nitrogen transport. That is a big culprit in this, I think. I don't know what the other.
I mean, that's clearly a massive challenge, and that challenge is not going to go away anytime soon. I mean, the number of cells, oocytes, for example, that we're now vitrifying seems to be going up day by day by day. And so the extent of freezing is not going to diminish in the short term, is it?
And it shouldn't. If that's the direction we're going into as a field, it's another topic. But if that's the direction we're going into,
sure.
Then sustainability is a concern, but it's not the number one right now. I think at some point it will be always. There will be a sustainability officer in the IVF lab. There will be a sustainability manager in an IVF clinic, and that could be a part-time job of that person. But I think it will always be among the first things that you discuss when you look at the clinic. But I think people like Fran in her practice as a junior embryologist, she has pointed out again and again in her talks that managers get on board because they see actually that they can save money. So the economic, so that's something you have to keep in mind as an embryologist. And as an embryologist, you don't necessarily think about how much does this cost. You don't think that way, and you need to start doing that. How much does it cost? And there is an association between sustainability changes and the cost associated with each procedure and each aspect of a procedure. And so I think that if you look at it from that point of view, a lot of people will jump on board. I mean, you just said something important. This is going to take a long time. I think it actually will go faster than you think. I was talking in every little step months. Don't wait a year or two for a little step to see whether that is going to work. Just take a few months and then reassess it. So we need to have the tools to have endpoints, of course, and calculate what our gain is each time. But I think this will go faster than you think. Once this paper and other efforts like this are hopefully changing things. And I must say, the preprint of this paper, RBM Online always being so good and putting papers online even before they're reviewed, or at least the abstract. But they go online when they're not completely approved yet by the journal, which is a marvelous thing. So it's a very fast system of accessibility. And so when we went to ASRM just a few months ago, exhibitors, and Giles can maybe comment on this more, but exhibitors came back to us and said how much they were affected by this. So there was already an immediate turnaround. They started thinking about how they could make changes in their distributions. And so you will see that this paper and other efforts, and particularly if the larger professional organizations come on board, you will see this go faster than you think.
We are looking for the cumulative effect of some possibly incremental changes. If every lab takes up one of these recommendations, it will have an impact. It is not an all or none proposition. You can adopt things and take steps that are feasible for you and that find support from the management and those who are in charge of the finances of the laboratory. It does not have to be all or none. And I think we even with such incremental change, we will see an impact because it is quite a large industry. I would also add that I definitely agree with Jacques about the fact that we need to study many of these aspects in much more detail. We actually have no numbers. If you asked me, what is the carbon footprint of the ART industry, I would have no idea. We know healthcare in general has a large footprint, but we don't know what the footprint of our own field is. So we need to study these things, and it means that we need support from the industry. We need support to be able to run these studies and experiments and to understand our own impact much better.
Mina, do you think that these recommendations, the idea of a sustainable sector, do you think it is possible? Do you think it's likely? I mean, you obviously are confident, otherwise you wouldn't be saying what you're saying. But in terms of a realistic endpoint, do you think that is in sight?
Yes, I absolutely do. I think Jacques illustrated this actually pretty well by saying that we had feedback from the industry saying they want to help.
Yes.
They want to be part of this change. And I think that's very important. The industry that supports IVF must participate in this effort. That is a key to eventual change, and to incremental change and to big change. So I think that we have a conviction on the part of the industry that they can make an impact. We have conviction on the part of practitioners that they can make an impact. They just need to know how. And we also need to be able to measure the impact that we are making. So there have to be ways in which we can assess how these incremental changes actually add up and make a difference. So I do believe that we will be able to achieve this goal with the help of the practitioners who are day in and day out dealing with the problem of waste, the problem of energy consumption, all the issues that we have listed in this paper, and the industry coming to accept that they play a role and that they can also facilitate change and help us achieve the goal of sustainability.
I echo what both Jacques and Mina have said, that in a way for the clinics to adopt this, it would be relatively easy because it's down to good management. Now, we spoke about like the growing inventory of embryos. We spoke about the transport of liquid nitrogen, or even the consumables which go from clinic to clinic. Now, this could be documented, and if we just took time to be more efficient, perhaps in our orders, perhaps the way that we store the embryos, or even, as Jacques has suggested, we actually manufacture the liquid nitrogen. All this can be looked upon, and we can find out the more economical solution, and that will be a green solution as well. And that's when it will be adopted. And there's so many facets to this that, of course, you only need to start one thing before getting the ball rolling. And I would just like to say that this collaboration started because, as I said, it started from the webinars, but the Alpha scientists have a long legacy of consensus meetings. They have the Cairo consensus, the Vienna, Istanbul. Now, this was an expert meeting, and we couldn't call it, and it's in no way a consensus because we haven't got the data yet, but the data will come, and it's a challenge for everyone to look at this and look at the numbers. So these are recommendations on every step of the IVF journey, and also the clinical IVF journey within the laboratory as well, to see which bits that we can focus on. So it was conducted all online, which again was quite new. Usually these expert meetings are done after a conference, which of course conferences are are hugely, wasteful exercises in, transport and carbon emissions. This was all available to be done online in a series of 2 expert meetings where we could discuss things. We had topics, and we could come to an agreement. And of course, everything was then transcripted anyway to form this manuscript, which of course then became this paper, which has been very popular. So I think it's a start of other such meetings, which can be done completely online, bringing together experts from many different areas of science.
You end the report by saying that your overall ambition is what you call Green IVF. What do you mean by that? And how achievable is it? You make many recommendations and describe many problems, but do you think they can all come together to achieve this greener IVF?
Green IVF, I think, will be achievable, not immediately, but it's going to take a lot of effort from a lot of people. And we've already talked about the limitations. We can't have the incubators turned off, and we can't suddenly stop using liquid nitrogen to store samples. But where we can make those changes, if everyone gets on board, we can certainly reduce our emissions, our waste, and just be a more sustainable service.
Some of the contributors included Charles Kalkani, architect, Anna Gorbunova, an embryologist, James Lawford Davies, who is specializing in law, Carol Losher, Roshan O'Reilly, Tim Sharp, Danny Smale, who also expertly produced all the figures for the paper, and we are very grateful to her for that. Pernilla Sorm from My Green Lab, another collaborator that we are very excited about. Cassandra Thiel from NYU in the US. So we had such a wealth of information being presented by these wonderful contributors. And this clearly played a key role in putting the paper together.